because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you, and I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that? It proves that Mr. Galileo was correct in his findings.
Well, what do you know? I would have been willing to bet on the hammer winning that race every time. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Jazzed About History. Today we're going to be talking about Galileo, the sun, the earth, moon, and stars, and where we fit inside of it all. It was February 13th, 1633, when Italian mathematician and amateur astronomer Galileo Galilei arrived in Rome to face charges of heresy for promoting the idea that the earth revolved around the sun, and not the other way around. Pretty much everybody, including the Roman Catholic Church, had believed that the earth was the center of the universe ever since a man by the name of Ptolemy said so. After all, Ptolemy was following on the work of another guy with just one name, Aristotle, and he was pretty famous and smart. Galileo, who had a restlessly active mind when thinking about things like this, had heard from another scientific guy of his day, Copernicus, that it made more sense for the sun to be at the center and for the earth to move around the sun. How Copernicus and Galileo figured stuff like this out is probably a whole lot more than we can cover in just one episode, but let's stick with Galileo for just a minute, and we'll come back to the whole being put on trial thing as well. Galileo was the son of a musician. He was born February the 15th, 1564, in Pisa, Italy. He entered the University of Pisa planning to study medicine, but shifted his focus to philosophy and mathematics. In 1589, he became a professor at Pisa for several years, and it was during this time that he demonstrated that the speed of a falling object is not proportional to its weight. That's what Aristotle had believed. According to some reports, Galileo, maybe a little bit mischievously, conducted his research by dropping objects of different weights from the famous Leaning Tower of Pisa. Now, this is, of course, what astronaut Dave Scott from the Apollo 15 mission to the moon famously demonstrated by dropping a hammer and a feather in that video clip we saw at the beginning. Back to Galileo, from 1592 to 1630, he moved to the University of Padua, and it was there that he developed a telescope that enabled him to observe lunar mountains and craters, to see the four largest moons of Jupiter and to observe its phases. He also discovered that the Milky Way was made up of stars. Following the publication of his research in 1610, Galileo gained acclaim, and he was appointed as the court mathematician at Florence. This is where he came into contact with the work of Mr. Copernicus, who was working in Poland, and thus was outside the reach of the powerful Catholic Church, which pretty much ruled the roost in Italy, where Galileo worked. The Church just could not let go of the idea that Earth was not the center of God's creation, and so Galileo was called to appear before a religious court known as the Inquisition. Galileo didn't really want to budge from his ideas, but he wasn't too keen on burning at the stake either, so he agreed to plead guilty to a lesser charge and was placed on house arrest by Pope Urban VIII. Galileo spent the rest of his days at his villa in Arcetri, near Florence, which is not a bad way to serve out your time, all things considered. He died there on January the 8th, 1642. So, was that the end of Galileo, Copernicus, and their heretical ideas about the sun at the center of our solar system? Well, of course not. Both Galileo and Copernicus were proven to be correct by later studies. Their work opened the pathway for later luminaries such as Sir Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, and even the inimitable Albert Einstein. Notice that after Galileo, most scientists had two names as well. And what about the teaching of the church? Do they still believe that the earth is at the center of everything? Well, no, of course they don't. But interestingly, the Vatican finally acknowledged its mistake and reversed the condemnation of Galileo Galilei in 1992. This has been another episode of Jazzed About History. I'm your host, John Fairless. Just a note that all images, artwork, music, and other material are used under the Creative Commons license on YouTube and are intended only as fair use for the purpose of information and entertainment. Do you have a favorite historical moment you'd like for us to feature? Send us an email at jazzedabouthistory@gmail.com.